Welcome to the Empowered Spirit Show. This is your host, Terry Ann Hyman. I'll explore the connection to the human spirit in a way that helps to navigate your life, including crisis. I am passionate about helping you to open up to your intuition and the metaphysical world of spirit to find your confidence in your own inner guidance. Take a pause, be inspired, learn ways to show up focused, centered, and more dynamic in your everyday life. Welcome back to the Empowered Spirit Show. Thank you so much for tuning in and joining me today. Are you looking for a magical place to shop and hold space? Check out Ritual+Shelter online or in Homewood, Alabama. Browse through their bookshelves covering topics such as energy healing, Reiki, chakras, auras, accessing the Akashic Records, shadow work, astrology, and earth-based healing. You can also find herbal teas and tinctures alongside crystals and oils to help establish a mindful mindset and fluid ambience before meditation, ritual work, and reflection. Ritual+Shelter is dedicated to providing one-on-one, in-depth conversations with customers to help them find the most efficient healing methods and resources that match the customer's unique interest and energy. They offer tarot sessions as well as Reiki, soundbowl, and crystal healing. Visit Ritual+Shelter.com to book an appointment and bring peace back to the body, mind, and spirit. Or find them on Instagram at Ritual+Shelter Shop. As this podcast goes to air, we've moved into the sun sign of Gemini. Gemini is mutable, adaptable, and its approach to life, shifting its attention to whatever is in the here and now. Ruled by Mercury, it is exquisite communication and magical. The twins remind us to be understanding and think outside the box. We intuit our surroundings and integrate the things we feel in our immediate environment. We understand that our ability to communicate is a gift. We prioritize fluidity and flexibility. We mend our hearts as much as our minds. We realize that we are allowed to change, which is one of our greatest powers. And as I call it, shape-shift our energy for the new season ahead. There are so many ways we can do this. My approach combines a little shamanism with energy psychology, gap tapping, envisioning, and dreaming, learning to get out of the gap of where you are and where you want to be to hold your vision. This time of year, as the temperatures rise and layers of clothing comes off, it's a time that can bring up even more insecurities in our body. Yes, for me, it's swimsuit season, as I've been talking about. The body confidence definitely comes into play for me. Do you suffer with this? Does this add another level of stress and panic to your day? Do you walk into your clothes closets in the morning and have a panic attack? Or perhaps start that critical talk? You know what I mean. Nothing fits. I look horrible. I have no clothes to wear. These jeans really make me notice this muffin top. Yeah, I could go on. I've been there. I've said it all to myself. But the truth is, it doesn't work. When we shame ourselves, it perpetuates a cycle. We continue doing the same behavior over and over and over. It is definitely time to break that cycle. So every year, as I start to pull out those bathing suits, I start to recognize where I am with that critical talk. I know I'm an empath, and recognizing I'm an emotional eater helped me to really get out of that gap from where I was to where I wanted to be. All that critical talk just puts us there. But when we can start to work with the energy psychology and this groundbreaking technique, I'm calling it gap tapping, we can stop the critical talk, get out of the gap, feel better about ourselves, and really appreciate who we are and how we show up. Yes, we do have to do a little shaping up our diets, getting out and exercising a little more, but why not? It's the perfect time of year. Gap tapping, as I have been talking about, is based on the emotional freedom technique. But like I say, when we get into that gap tapping helps you pull yourself out. It really helps bridge that energy. The gap holds deep stuff. And that is what we target in my 7-week Soul Work 102 class, Shape Shifting. Shape shifting out of the old patterns that keep you stuck into the wild woman of summer, an archetypal energy that helps you break the habits, shape up, and feel inspired to live your dreams. Summer is about fun and growth and brings forward the divine feminine. Why not turn it into an adventure with some shamanic tools and energy psychology techniques. It's not too late to join us. We begin on Wednesday, May 29th. The link with more information will be in the show notes. Or reach out and schedule a spiritual upgrade breakthrough call with me, and let's talk about this program and see if it's a good fit for you. In today's episode, I continue this idea of shifting and changing out of old habits into better ones with my guest, Dr. Susan Perry. Her book, The Hidden Power of Aikido, helps you transcend conflict and cultivate inner peace. She begins this practice because she wanted to quit smoking and find better things to do with her time and energy. In this episode, we talk about what Aikido is, what it means, real-life applications for self-transformation, conflict resolution, joy, and how Aikido can help peacefully resolve difficulties that arise with intimidating and unpredictable people. Before we begin, let's take a moment to pause and center and set an intention for where you are right now. So wherever you are, if you can, close the eyes. Taking a nice deep inhale, breathing up the body. And as you exhale, pull all your energy into you, grounding. Inhale, expanding the breath up the body. Exhale, breathing all the way back down. Centering your energy, calling in the spiritual body to align right on top of the physical, the emotional, the mental bodies. Inhale, breathing up the body. And now as you exhale, dropping right into the heart, right into the deepest part, feeling that connection with your spirit and the greater spirit. Know that you are loved, guided, protected. Feeling all this energy coming in around you as we take this time and call in the masters, the teachers, the archangels for joy and love, the crystal beings for amusement, magnification, calling in your higher self for focus, for clarity, to bring forward messages for you. Taking another deep inhale and exhale. As we honor this great wheel of life, notice where you are. Here where I am, we find ourselves moving closer and closer to that new season of summer. And we notice the growth, all the many seeds and projects we've started this spring. We honor this process. Calling in the directions for guidance and protection to the east, the south, the west, and the north, above you, below you, right into the very center, right into that deepest part of your heart, setting an intention. See it, hear it, feel it, know it, and allow the elevated emotions how you want to feel to radiate out all around you, setting this energy. Taking another deep inhale and exhale, grounding your energy all the way down with Mother Earth. Feel the heart open. Feel the focus of the third eye. And as you're ready, blinking the eyes back open, coming back. So my guest today is Susan Perry, PhD. She has practiced Aikido for nearly 50 years. She holds a Rokudan 6th degree black belt, and Aikido, a doctorate in philosophy, and a Godan 5th degree black belt in Japanese calligraphy. Best known for founding and publishing Aikido Today magazine, she is now president of Aiko Institute. A former assistant professor in California State University System, she lives in Claremont, California. So let us welcome Susan to the show. Welcome, Susan.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Yes, I'm glad to be here too, and really have not talked about this on the show. So I'm very excited to bring it forward, and congratulations on your book, The Hidden Power of Aikido. Welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
So I'd like to start the conversation and ask, what led you to writing this book right now?
I could say a lot of lofty things, but actually, the way I got into Aikido was with my late husband. We needed to quit smoking. Sort of a pedestrian reason, but in its accidentalness, it kind of led the way to deeper and richer things over the years. And quitting smoking is a difficult thing to do. A lot of people have failed and failed again at it, and so the fact that it led me into Aikido and I was successful means a lot to me.
Well, what a great thing. It's not really what I expected, but you're right. It is hard when we break habits, especially one like smoking. It's hard to sometimes, shift out of that habit, out of that pattern. And so I do agree. Sometimes we have to find something to replace it. What a healthy thing to replace it with. Yeah.
Yeah, right. And it's a healing venture as well.
It is a healing venture. What does Aikido stand for?
Well, it's 3 kanji, 3 characters, I, Ki, and Do. And I literally means fitting, like a key into a lock, but it's often used to point to harmony or connection. Ki is energy. Most people are more familiar with Chinese pronunciation, Qi, as in Tai Chi or something like that. And then Do is the way, the path. I keep the way of healing energy or the way of harmonious energy.
Harmonious energy. Yeah, I am a teacher of Reiki. So we do talk about ki. So many of my listeners do understand that idea of it being a universal energy, the word ki. But we do see it chi, ki, prana, ruach. There are many words for the same. Yeah.
Does a rei come from proper? Is it kanji for proper or right? Something like that?
I'm not really sure. That's a good question. We always talk about it. It's spelled REI.
Right.
So we talk about it as a universal key life force energy.
Yeah.
So how would you answer that?
No, I think that's right. Yeah, life force energy.
Yeah, that's how I see it. And that's how I work with it. And as we were kind of talking before we hit record, like I talk about the healing art and we were talking about it as a martial art, but you're also talking about it more than just a martial art.
I actually contend in my book that after World War II, when it starts appearing in the Western world more prominently, that Aikido, it's a Budo. That's where the martial art business comes from. And Budo, Do again is the way, and then Bu is translated as fighting spirit or war. But the etymology of the character Bu comes from stopping the spear. So it actually comes from protective arts or, to make peace. But it got translated as martial art, and Mars, is the god of war. So Aikido, because it's a Budo, got put into that category, I think, a little mistakenly. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, I do believe my son as a child studied an Aikido form of karate. Because there are many words I recognize in there, like the dojo and some of these sensei and some of these words that I recognize we used a lot when he was studying that. Yeah.
Right. Well, it's not karate. It's a little different, the different arts, but they're both karate do. They're both dos. Yeah, and they're both budos. So Aikido has no competitions or tournaments. So that's one big difference.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's a non-competitive. So that's always the first question students ask, or at least the second or third, is how can a martial art be non-competitive? that seems to most people in the West to be inconsistent or
Hmm.
contradictory even.
Yeah. I guess I never really even thought about karate as like competitive art, but it was. I mean, I know that sounds silly, but it was like self-discipline is how I saw it from my son. But yet
Yeah.
then the more you do it, the more you do get into that competitiveness of it. But there's so many things that you talk about in your book as I started to read through. I mean, I love the whole idea of using it to embrace change, as you were talking about it, breaking a habit and embracing change. And I think all of us are going through some kind of change right now.
Sure, Mother Earth is going through many changes and we're
Yeah.
riding upon that. So if we're sensitive, we'll see them. And if we're not, they'll sort of
See us.
come into our lives in unpredictable ways, right?
Yes, exactly. And you do talk about that. You talk about embracing change. You talk about being more in tune with the natural forces going on. And you talk about flexibility. I mean, all of these like metaphors and images and ideas come forward. Speak a little bit about that.
Well, the founder used to say things that we would view as inscrutable, like "I am the universe," and um, and what he means is that we are one with the energy of the universe. I mean, that's all people who work on these kinds of things, like you and Zen practitioners and other spiritual creatures, that's the aim, right? Is to sort of cut off all of the divisions and find that single thing that is similar to us all, because we are just all manifestations of the natural forces of the energy of the world. And so that Aikido also, the founder says, I am the universe. And I take that to mean that he's dropped all of the divisiveness that separates him out as a particular man in a particular place at a particular time. And once he loses all of those things, which is, of course, a terrifically difficult thing to do, that he can just be one with what is.
Mm. Yeah, I love that. It's one of the things I actually did learn too when I started studying Reiki. We are all one. We are all connected.
Right.
I love that connection.
Yeah. And that connection is really what Aikido teachers talk about all the time. Even if they don't talk about these more lofty things, and a lot of them don't, they do talk about connection, because the situation that you find yourself in if you start an Aikido class is that you'll be on the mat and then you'll have a partner. And so it's in class, Aikido is very much learning how to say defend or protect yourself. And so there's all these forms, and in that it's very much like a karate or a judo, where you're dealing with an incoming attack or something from your partner. And so you want to connect with the energy of the person that's bringing something to you. And one of my favorite sayings is that you want to be aware of the space in between the people, the space in between you and someone else, because it's not just empty. There's a lot going on there, and energy would be a easy thing to point to, right?
Yeah, it is. I mean, I know when we start teaching Reiki, we start teaching like feeling that force of energy. We start with our hands, but you're right. It's like even that space between you and I, like that connection and that energy in there.
Yeah. Yeah, and a lot of times people just pass that off, they don't think about that, and things go wrong, and especially if the energy doesn't feel good in between. And I think people can identify with that. They can think of times when they've met someone or been in a place where they weren't feeling right, where it didn't feel good, and that's byoki, right? Bad ki. And but there's things you
Okay.
can do to change that. And so embracing change, we can come back to that idea of how can I change what's going on in between, the space in between you and me, to make it more one, right? We want to get to that unification of oneness. I am the universe. And because most of the world doesn't really view things in these kind of lofty cosmic ways, we have our work cut out for us, right?
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do. And I think that noticing that energy between people is really important. I know I teach a lot about it with like empaths and noting your boundaries and your energy boundaries and your aura and your field. But I think in our everyday existence, it's really important, because the tendency, at least what I recognize, is people tend to like throw their energy or project it onto somebody else instead of recognizing, okay, this is where I stand and this is where you stand, and we can agree to disagree, or we can agree to find some kind of agreement, but to really not understand, what does that feel like? And I feel like the Aikido kind of lends that, like the back and forth movement. If you move forward, I go back. If I move, I feel like if we can move in unison like that, it's almost like a dance.
Right. It is a dance, I'd say. We come from a world of dichotomies in the West. There's mind and body, and those are supposed to be two different separate things. And people have a difficult time merging them into one thing, which really they are. And also male and female is another dichotomy. I'd say the female energy is receptive and the male energy is more forceful. And so we can go back to like Lao Tzu's yin and yang to describe those energies. But we all have both in us. And so the idea is to balance, to ground, to center, and bring those energies to become one instead of two things, these two divisive things that work against one another. So yes, and when you're talking or when you're massaging or dealing with somebody else's ki, a martial arts class or whatever, then there is this kind of give and take. Because if two people come in with strong energy, it's going to be difficult. Or if two people are just not willing to engage, then that's difficult too. So that space in between, what's happening in that space in between? If somebody's being forceful, then maybe it's a time to receive and then turn it back around. And so you can, stand your ground if it's that kind of situation.
Yeah, I love that idea, that space in between, the gap.
Yeah. Yeah. See, isn't that good? I really like that vision of things because it opens up people's eyes. I mean, we all have the space in between. And so why not look at it and see? So being honest and being accepting of what is, I think, is another very strong element in Aikido. Because if you start projecting too much, especially if you're dealing with attack situations and things like that, it can actually be dangerous. If you assume this or you assume that, and you see maybe I'm a small woman, you see some big guy and you think, okay, I'm gonna do this and that. Well, no, you have to, some big guys are just very gentle. And so you can get misled by, looking at the forms of things and assuming that the energy inside is going to be a certain way. Yeah, so you have to open yourself up, right? Embrace the change and see what's coming in that space in between.
I agree. And flexibility you talk about too.
Flexibility, right? Being able to change. Well, I think that's where the flexibility comes in. And the flexibility permeates everything. If you have a inflexible mind, probably you have a body that's not willing to bend and change with the forces that are around you. And if you have a real bendy mind and you don't have any like a center or place from which strength comes, then you'll be buffeted around by the forces that come in too. That's not good either. So you want to be in the center, somewhere in between those two extremes. Yeah, Chudo, often they talk about Chudo in some sects of Aikido, which is the middle path.
Chudo.
Chudo, CHU, and then DO.
Chudo, choosing the middle path. Yeah. I love that. So tell us a little bit about the book. Is this for the novice? Is this for an experienced person? Like, where are you directing this information?
Yeah, good question. I wrote the book for non-practitioners. And well, of course, I hope practitioners will also read it because they can sort of up their game a little bit. I'm educated in philosophy. I used to teach that. And so I have some unique skills that I was able to bring towards understanding Aikido and its principles. And so I do that in this book. There's a lot of things that are given lip service in Aikido, and often they don't come with much explanation at all. And it's not the fault of anybody. It's just the way it is. This art after World War II made its debut on the world stage. And because we'd been in a war with Japan then, and Japan was not supposed to, with the occupation there, not supposed to deal in or talk about Shinto things or sword things, Budo things. It got kind of, how can I say it? It got kind of limited in a certain way. And so it was viewed as kind of a martial, well, something that happens on the map between two people. I wanted to open it up because I think that there's a lot of people that would be interested in this art uh, if it truly was known what the art was about in this kind of embrace change spiritual way. And also after the COVID, I know a lot of people that teach. I used to do a magazine for 20 years, a nonpartisan international magazine on Aikido. So I was fairly familiar with all the schools and traveled quite a bit. And I was sad to learn after COVID that a lot of dojos were closing because classes were shut down in a lot of places. Like, if you taught for a city or a university, they just closed down the classes. And so getting people after a year and a half, 2 years to just go back to practice was not really something that was easy to do. People had thought about things and changed their lives and sometimes moved in a completely different direction. And Aikido is an intimate art, so the bodies are touching, and that's another thing that a lot of people weren't comfortable with. So in part, I was trying to help repopulate Aikido classes by writing this book and letting people know about the wonderful art that it is. And that it teaches people how to resolve conflicts in their lives. Even if the conflict is something silly like quitting smoking, it doesn't have to be, you don't have to be attacked by some violent person from the bushes. It usually doesn't happen. But things come up every day in people's experiences, whether it's a shopkeeper and the interaction goes wrong, or if it's a family member, or in a professional life, or on the freeway with cars taking you right of way. There's all kinds of conflicts that come up, and tensions that it produces, and anxieties that we live with, and it doesn't have to be that way. I don't think we have to live in a world of conflict, even though look around now and it just seems like so much conflict everywhere. But it starts with ourselves and, making ourselves open, making ourselves able to deal with people that are difficult to deal with, or situations that are difficult to deal with. And this I can kind of present in the book, and then hope that if somebody's interested in those ideas, they might go find a school. Because I do think the physical practice is important, because we hold tensions and conflict in our body. It's not just a mind thing, going back to the mind body, but that sometimes recognizing where we're resisting or fleeing or being overly aggressive, then it gives us a place to start working on that too.
Yeah, I so agree with all of it, because I think mostly people are reactive when it comes to conflict right now.
Right.
Right. They just kind of like react before they stop to presence the energy. And I think that's part of it too, is people aren't able to really slow down and presence that energy, going back to the whole idea of that space in between. So I think it does teach us many things.
Yeah.
Now, would you say that it was the physical practice that helped you with the quitting of smoking, or how did that kind of develop for you? He's
Oh
like, I'm
yeah.
going to quit smoking and start doing a keto. I mean, like, how did that come
Yeah,
about?
that's kind of how it came about. Well, we were going to quit smoking. My late husband and I. It was a joint effort, and then we knew that it was going to be difficult. So actually, it was my husband who suggested we do something entirely different to break our patterns, our daily patterns, because you take a smoke at certain points in time, after a meal, or after writing a chapter, or after this or after that. And so without that kind of punctuation through the daily flow of energy, um, people get a loss. And then maybe they take up drinking or something worse. But we took up Aikido. My husband found it, and that was very different because it was in the late 70s, and not a lot about the Asian arts were known. And so it was just very different. And I didn't think I would be interested because I wasn't interested in martial arts. But he said, come and look at a class with me. And that just did it. I saw the beautiful flowing roles that people were projected into. And I really liked the idea of doing that. And so I was in Aikido for quite a while before I became interested in looking at it deeper. And at that time in the world, there were a lot of gurus, and there was a lot of misleading going on, and you had to be careful. Cults and all that kind of stuff were afoot. And I didn't want to get into something like that. I was a philosophy student, and philosophy is not the same thing as religion. Philosophy has a more, it doesn't jump onto dogmas, which religions do. They tend to do that. There is some crossover, but in philosophy, you want to make a logical progression from here to there and know what you're doing, and everything is nice and clear and transparent. And so whenever inscrutable sayings and things like that came up, I was a little suspicious and suspect. And I wanted to just do Aikido and not the Japanese culture that was attached to it. But that was a sort of silly sophomoric view of mine, I later learned. And so I did quite a bit of work to make sure that it wasn't a religion, as some people claimed it was. Yeah, so we got into quit smoking, and the physical side was the side that I embraced first. And then much later, as I began to meet people that were deeper and better versed in the art, I began to open up to seeing Aikido in new ways. And that ultimately led to this book. I mean, for some questions, I did travel to Japan and talk with the leaders of Aikido and Shinto priests that the founder used to talk to and things like that. I really did go the full way to make sure that I knew what was going on in the art of Aikido. And I wasn't disappointed.
Excellent. I think that is important. And I think, then opening it up and expanding it, like many practices. Recently I was talking to Peter Coyote. He was talking about the whole practice of Zen Buddhism. And his latest book was about bringing it into our culture so that we all can access these teachings and they don't have to stay in one area, which is kind of what you feel like you're talking about. It doesn't have to stay over here as a culture or religion. I never really thought of it as a religion, but maybe some do. And let it open up to all the many benefits.
Right.
Yeah.
I think it's important. And, there was a certain amount of it that was accepted into our culture and our way of doing things here in the West, mainly the martial arts side. But, and people would shy away from I am the universe kind of statements by the founder as being, those Eastern inscrutable sayings. And then if the founder was, he would talk about the Kojiki, which is the indigenous spiritual book of Japan, and it lays down their cosmogony really. But and so people took that to mean that he was a religious man. But I argue in this book that no, he wasn't religious. Like Aesop's fables or stories from the Old Testament, that he was referring to stories that the Japanese people would know about, that delivered moral lessons about how you deal with the world and what we are and what the world is, to use as a springboard for teaching Aikido. Not necessarily that he was indoctrinating people into a religion. And so when you see it that way, then those stories, those kinds of stories, and all the cultures have those kinds of stories. Then they have fantastic stories. They're exaggerated. They include some very strange creatures and, like Ganesh with the elephant head and all different kinds of things. Then we can really appreciate the stories and what they have to teach us. And he was a Japanese man, and those are the stories he was familiar with. And so there are other things in our culture that are the same as that, and it makes it all a little more transparent and easy to digest. But I think we had to get farther away from World War II in order to allow ourselves to look. At first, our fascination with the esoteric ways of Japan were kind of guarded, and we owe it to not only the occupying forces, which gave us a lot of military men that studied Aikido and then came back and opened up their own dojo, and those typically were martial arts dojos. And but we also had the Beat generation that went over because they were interested in the pottery or the poetry, the Zen of Japanese experience, and they brought those things back and wrote about them. And so now we're getting a little more distance, a little more familiar with some of those things. And so it's time, I felt, that we could really dive into it full-bodied, and appreciate it for what it can teach us and see the similarities that are there between that culture and ours.
I love that. Yeah. I know, like, even in teaching Reiki, like Mrs. Takata, who was a Japanese woman living in Hawaii, is how Reiki spread to us here in the United States. She was directly my lineage. And she talked about, too, like sometimes, she would kind of stretch the truth or use Bible stories to help us understand, because that's how we do like to learn, is through stories. And so maybe sometimes it was a little exaggerated. And so we did have a lot of people said, no, we have to go to the exact history and go back and really trace it, which they have done. To me, it didn't take away from the practice, but I could see how that can help us understand it and bring it into our culture. So I can totally understand that. And I do think that as you're explaining it, yes, there is the physical aspects, then there is the philosophy aspects, and then the way of life, that mindfulness and working at one with Mother Earth, I think is really important. So besides quitting smoking, what were some of the other effects that you noticed for you through this practice?
Oh, gee, one of the things I do in the book is to present a lot of my points in the description of personal stories, places where I have encountered difficulty and how Aikido helped me resolve those difficulties. And so one is when I had a class at Cal State LA, and I have been changing campuses from Cal State Fullerton to Cal State LA. And I was sort of a newbie, so I got, the intro classes and the ethics classes and things like that. So when I walked in, opened the door, immediately I saw, small Japanese women kind of hiding under their desks, and two great, enormous, muscular men sitting in the middle of the room. And they were, I don't know if they had been drinking, but they were acting that way, just intimidating the heck out of anybody else in the room. And here I come in and I'm supposed to teach them ethics, and I'm sort of a petite, woman coming in. So I think, okay, I've got to get this under control right away, or I'm really going to have a struggle with the class. Yeah, right. Well, nope, that's not the way to do it. But I had studied a form of Aikido, which does a lot of lessons in ki and extending your ki energy, right? And in that class, because I was a woman and largely a male class, when we did demonstrations, I would always be asked to demonstrate extending your ki, because this one exercise has you be lifted by both arms up in the air, and then we train to prevent ourselves from going up by directing our energy down and grounding real heavily. And if you got good, then you could allow yourself to be taken up and then redirect at the top and bring yourself down. Well, that's what I did. I went up to the front of the class right away, and I asked for two volunteers, two strong guys, to come up and help me demonstrate a certain thing. And those very two, of course, they were the only ones, came up and, I admired their strength and everything. And then I went through this process that I'd gone through a billion times in these demonstrations, hoping that I would be successful in this one too. And I was. And they were just astounded. they were just astounded. And so I said, thank you for your help. And then I said some, inscrutable things like from the Asian repertoire of Aikido. And they went down and sat down and they were perfect students. And all the women were coming out and sitting at their desks. So I was on the way, it had worked me get through that moment. After class, when I was walking down the hall, those same two guys came running down. Professor Perry, how many years did it take you to learn how to do? Oh, they were just so impressed. They even visited me during my office hours during that semester. So that was a great turning point. And I had to see what was going on first, if I would to analyze that in sort of the terms I set out in my book, to see what was going on first and feel that energy and feel what was going on between the class as sort of an entity and myself, feeling that space in between and trying to get on top of that. But I embraced what was important of what was going on in there, and I needed to provide something interesting for the two men who clearly didn't want to be there in an ethics class. And
yeah, embracing that space in between.
right.
I love that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you talk a little bit about joyful life. What does joyful life have to do with any of this?
I think you referred to some things, take seeing what's before you, and instead of providing a description or anticipating things, to actually see what's before you, and it's taking joy in the energy that's around you. So I think that kind of divesting ourselves of all of our habitual ways of looking at things and approaching something with fresh eyes, anew, and seeing what's there. And this brings so much joyful energy. I do that in the morning when I get up. I can go walk in the garden and just the flowers or things like that. It brings joy, and that makes a difference in how you do the rest of the day. I used to get up and get my coffee and turn the news on right away. Well, that's pretty depressing these days. And I do watch news, but I kind of wait for later when I'm already set up for a nice day, and I can put it in perspective then a little better. So yeah, taking joy in simple things and really paying attention to that energy and the gifts that we're given and that kind of thing can make a big difference in how much tension you hold in your body, how much anxiety you feel. I find people are constantly afraid and angry. And, in the West, we are taught to sort of suppress those things and not to let them out. But in Aikido, the Aikido mat actually is one great way to experience, to let those things out in a way that's not going to harm anyone. And then as you let them out, you sort of liberate yourself from those baser feelings and can enjoy, reap the rewards of better things in the world.
It's like the beginner's mind that you speak of. Yeah.
Beginner's mind, yeah. It's very difficult. It all sounds so simple, but one other thing to answer a question you asked a while ago is on the mat, someone comes and grabs your hand, say, as an attack. And I was, like I said, a lone woman really for a long time in a man's world, and they'd be big men too. And so I learned one thing that surprised me was they'd come up and grab my hand, and I would have a little bit of a resistance or maybe a shock element. I wasn't fully in the moment. I wasn't fully allowing myself to embrace what was there. And so maybe with the perception of a large man, I had that initial reaction, and because I had had trouble in my past with things like that. And so that's one way I found in my body. I thought, oh yeah, I'm perfectly open. I'm a philosophy student. I can do this, no problem. But then my body had that kind of immediate reaction. I thought, oh my God, what's this? I need to work on that, And so it directed my attention to how I could change that to be a better in the moment kind of person and embrace the change there. It's very subtle.
It's very subtle. Yes. I think it helps people to understand when we do talk about being in the present moment. What does that mean? And so sometimes we can come about it from the other way in the physical sense, to be present, to understand what's going on, like you just described. I think that's a good way to understand what that means, really.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So in your practice, do you start with like exercises for yourself, or does it immediately start working with somebody else?
Usually it's kind of a formal beginning, and you sit in a line and you sit on your heels, or, a lot of schools offer other like chairs are possible and so forth, although not typical, because us older people, our knees are getting a little, a little sore and achy. But usually people are so happy to have you there, they'll find some way of accommodating your needs. But yeah, you sit in a line, the instructor comes in. Usually there's they call it a shoman or a kamiza, which has a calligraphy of Aikido and a picture of the founder up in front. And the instructor comes in, everybody bows to that front wall. And then the instructor turns and engages with the students, bow to one another. And of course, in Japanese society, bowing is like almost a handshake. It's just extending respect to the other person. And so that's one place. See, people, it almost looks like a religion, doesn't it? With a kind of, people might say altar and then bowing and all that. But actually, it's not from a religious point of view at all. So to answer your question, that's how we begin. And then the instructor will usually start stretches. So we have stretching routines to kind of prepare the body for the movements that are to come after. And then it all unravels like that. The instructor will present a lesson to be worked on, and usually in Aikido, but not always. It could be a breathing meditation or something like that, breath work. But typically, another person comes up and delivers an attack, and that person and the instructor performs a technique that you're supposed to learn and work on. And then the class breaks up into partners and tries to work on that while the instructor comes around and helps or advanced students.
Very interesting. I have recently stepped back into a few Tai Chi classes.
Hey.
And so it's been very interesting, something I used to do in the 70s, and just kind of getting back into the flow, into the movement, into the breath,
Yeah.
of course. Yeah. So it is all very good. And it is different ways to approach, I do agree, life's problems, life's conflicts, and being able to really kind of be present and be flexible. I think right now we all need a little flexibility, and things are shifting. Things are shifting in the world, and we can't keep going with that same rigid way of doing it. So it allows us to have that openness. And I do think, my personal opinion, but I think you'll agree, is like when we can physically embrace it and feel it and get into the practice of it, it takes it out of the intellect, and we can learn it and really recognize the subtle differences.
Right. If we don't open up to it, then we sort of retreat into fear or anger, and that only produces even more rigidity with all of the little boxes that we put the world into. So yeah, embracing it and allowing it to inform you is the way to go. I agree. Yeah.
Allowing it to inform you. Yeah, I agree. I agree with that very much so. And it's for everybody, right? Old, young, little, big, whatever.
Yeah, exactly. And it doesn't matter what age. Uh, there's lessons there that are easier for people that have had a little more life experience to get. Or sometimes, well, given the person, it doesn't really matter about the age, because somebody might be a little well dug into their responses to things and their habits. And so then that's a barrier for them. Yeah, all different kinds of people. And the more different kinds of people there are, the more interesting it is, because people bring, the habits of their age group or their culture or maybe their geographical place where they grew up. All those things go together to make us who we are. And then we need to sort of forget a lot of that in order to get down to the energy and what's occurring between two people, right? In Aikido, there's usually, because we work in partner practice, and I must say, it's Japanese, and Tai Chi is Chinese, right? And Tai Chi is often viewed as a moving meditation, but Aikido is also described in that same way. And Tai Chi does have a partner practice, but usually people don't know it by that. And Aikido has a solo practice, but people don't always know it by that. So they're very similar in what they're doing. And in Aikido, with that partner setup, then the person that's being attacked wants to receive that energy. And so to receive it is to blend with it. That's where the Aiki comes from, the harmonious energy, to move in the same direction and alignment, and then to sort of take control of it, and then you can do a technique to bring it to resolve the situation. So there's a receptive and a leading and a following that goes on. It changes throughout the whole technique. And so you don't meet force to force. And you learn how to receive and you learn how to give. And those are two great lessons to be able to perform in life, receiving and giving. Often people are just receptive.
Definitely. In partnerships and relationships, I remember an astrologer early on told me, you need to learn how to fight. I'm like, what does she mean? But that's exactly right. To learn how to fight, quote unquote, with each other, but really be in that partnership and resolve the conflicts and not just keep pushing, but figure out how to open the space and find that balance. I totally agree with that. Yeah.
I have a little Substack writing project I've been working on since October. I just write a little bit every morning, and it's short and it doesn't cost anything. But one thing I was writing on is compassion and ferocity. In looking forward to this interview, I thought, well, what if I'm supposed to present some principles of Aikido? So maybe ferocity and compassion, or yeah, how does that go? And so people understand compassion clearly, but ferocity, why would that be important? But like a mama bear, in protecting her young, or standing your ground, centering and then standing your ground. It doesn't mean to be a fighting spirit in the world. It means to be true to yourself. And also, ferocity, you might need to summon a little more protective energy, a little more, I don't want to say warlike energy, but strong energy to insist on, doing the right thing. If you see somebody being unjustly treated or something, you might want to go help out. And that might mean that you need to take up a position of reason that will be opposing some of the things that are happening around. But like a mama bear, she's trying to protect her young, and so she'll get right out in front there and stop what she sees as threats to her young ones. And that kind of energy is very important. And as mothers and women in the world who do caretake a lot, I think we are already familiar with that. So a lot of this training is to just summon those archetypes that we're already familiar with, and we have. And women have a tremendously strong center, because the center is there below the belly button, and we have a lot going on there every month. And so in this case, it's men that have a hard time learning how to drop that upper body center down to the hip area to move with the powers of the universe, because that's where they get picked up.
Yes. Well, thank you for sharing that. And I agree. I think there's a lot to learn from both sides of that can help us, because it does take sometimes a little bit of being able to stand in your truth to show compassion for somebody that might have a difference of opinion, or maybe they're the only person in the group that does, but yet you want to honor that person. And sometimes we get meek, or I don't want to make waves, or I don't know if I can stand up for them. But this allows us to feel both of those forces of energy that can balance. So I think that's a beautiful understanding. Thank you. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, what a great conversation. And I never really thought about this practice and how much it can help us in the world at large. For as easy, well, it's not easy, but for something like quitting smoking to changing the way in which you do show up in the world. So I think it has a lot of great ways that it can come in to help us. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Where can I direct people to find your work? And do you teach? What's going on for you?
When I have this book handed in to the publisher, they insisted I create a author web page. And so I had somebody put it together for me, and I put most all the stuff I do in there, and that is susanperry.info. That's the web page name. And there, if somebody's interested in my daily writings, they can they can hop onto my Substack, or I'm an artist as well. I have an online gallery that's there on the menu. It talks about me as an author and as an artist and as a teacher, which I've been a teacher all my life. And so I'm actually at the end of this month going to step away from that a little bit. I have a senior student, Daniel Tran, who I am making the instructor of the Aikido class, so I can do more writing and painting. And, part of the idea is that you have to realize your limitations, and I can't do everything. And so sometimes you have to give up something to go in another direction. But I'm not giving it up. I meet with the instructors every month, as I've done the past 30 years, and will kind of be more of a director in the background than a teacher on the mat. So
Yeah.
I'm doing a lot of things. I
Excellent.
also have a little events section to that menu. And so I put all my events, whether it's interviews like this or demonstrations, like one I'm going to give next Sunday with my big 6-foot brush at the Cherry Blossom Festival. So
Nice.
they can look there.
Yeah, so many things to do for sure. That's awesome. I will definitely put the links in the show notes. And I think it's important to have all those different things about ourselves, right? As we grow and change and shift. And yeah, I'm an artist too, so I hear you on that for sure. So as we go to close, I like to come back and ask the question. We've kind of answered it, but just to kind of leave our listeners with a really beautiful, uplifting thought. How do you feel that bringing this work out with Aikido can help to empower the spirit right now?
I think it can help empower the spirit right now by teaching us how to deal with conflict, both conflicts that come up for us physically and conflicts that come up for us in our thinking. And we have a lot to think about now, and it's time for us to learn how to embrace change, including the natural forces of the world.
Yeah, I agree. I would say also, too, just the whole idea of helping us to resolve conflict, be adaptable, and be present to what is going on with the forces of nature. Yes, having that responsibility. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. I've appreciated this conversation and the work that you're doing. Good luck with the book. Yeah, to your spirit. Yeah, namaste.
Thank you. I appreciate you.
Yes. The practice of Aikido can open up more compassion to understand our neighbors. It isn't religion, but more a philosophy of life with all its hidden secrets. We do need to become stewards of the natural world and provide loving protection to all living things. All the information for Susan can be found in the show notes. Thanks again for listening. This is your host, Terry Ann Hyman. To your spirit, namaste. Come join us in Soul Work 102 Shape Shifting class. It begins May 29th. Learn how to shape shift your energy and bring forward the wild woman in you. Using shamanic tools and energy psychology, we will open up to new parts of you, move through change, and find ways to release the limited beliefs and addictions you hold with food, cravings, binge eating, and all that comes with being an emotional eater. The link with more information and to register will be in the show notes.